The equation I was given for the trig identities manipulative project was cotangent squared theta times cosine squared theta over cotangent squared theta minus cosine squared theta equals 1. And when you're solving these equations, you want to use the trig identities to simplify it to its form so you can get it to equal to 1. So when you're trying to solve for the top part, you can simplify it to cosine squared theta over sine squared theta, and then cosine squared theta over 1. Because you're multiplying both fractions here, the denominator is the same because there's a 1 on the right side. Therefore, you can multiply cosine squared theta times cosine squared theta, and you'll get cosine to the 4th theta over sine squared theta. Now, when looking at the bottom of this equation, we have cotangent squared theta minus cosine squared theta, and that is pretty much exactly the same except there's a subtraction sign in between. So we have cosine squared theta over sine squared theta minus cosine squared theta over 1. And to simplify this more, you'd have to get the common denominators to be able to subtract these. So you'd multiply each side on the top and the bottom by sine squared theta, and then that would come out to cosine squared theta minus cosine squared theta times sine all over sine squared theta. After simplifying, it would look something like this: cosine squared theta minus cosine squared theta times sine squared theta all over sine squared theta. And then you would take the original equation that we had simplified from the top and the bottom and put them both over each other. So this is what both parts of our simplified top and bottom of this equation would look like when we put it all over each other and divide. So it would be cosine to the 4th theta over sine squared theta, and then this would be all over cosine squared theta minus cosine squared theta times sine squared theta over sine squared theta. And because you were dividing and they have the same denominators, you can just cancel these out and simplify from there. Now that we took sine squared theta off of both of the top and the bottom of the equation, we can simplify further by pulling out a common factor, which would be cosine squared theta. And now this would look like cosine squared theta in parentheses 1 minus sine squared theta close parentheses. Now we know that from our trig identities, 1 minus sine squared theta does actually equal cosine squared theta. So let me move that here, move that up. And now we have cosine to the 4th theta over cosine squared theta times cosine squared theta. And we know that cosine squared theta times cosine squared theta does equal cosine to the 4th theta. And anything divided by itself is equal to 1. So we have verified that cotangent squared theta times cosine squared theta divided by cotangent squared theta minus cosine squared theta does equal 1.